Okay, so let's just jump right into this. I want to start today's deep dive with a bit of an exercise, just a quick visualization thing.
Oh, all right. I'm game.
Okay, so I want you to close your eyes for a second, and this goes for you listening at home too, and just picture an elementary school teacher.
Okay. Elementary school teacher. I'm picturing a classroom, maybe some chalk dust in the air, a blackboard with cursive writing on it, a map of the world pulled down over the board.
Right, exactly. And the person at the front of that room.
Someone patient. Definitely someone patient, someone wearing a sensible suit or a nice dress. Just someone whose entire job description is to nurture. Yep. They're there to mold young minds, keep order, and, make sure nobody eats the paste.
Right. It's a profession built entirely on safety, on rules and guiding the future. Now, I want you to imagine that this specific teacher, this person who is entrusted with the safety of 30 or 40 small children, had a secret in their file.
Okay, the tone just shifted pretty drastically there.
Yeah, it's a really dark secret. Imagine that this teacher, this absolute figure of authority, had actually been expelled from school when they were a student themselves. And not just once. Expelled twice.
Twice. That's actually really difficult to do. You usually have to try pretty hard to get expelled twice from anywhere.
And the reason wasn't for skipping class. It wasn't talking back to the principal or smoking behind the gym. It was for stabbing fellow students with a penknife.
Wait, stabbing?
Yes.
With a knife?
A penknife. Physical violent assault.
That is just horrifying. And you're telling me this person was allowed to become a teacher? Like the system just let a guy who literally stabs people be around children?
He not only allowed, but he obtained a teaching certificate. He passed his exams and he actually worked in a school in 1902. And that teacher, that was Benito Mussolini.
Wow, okay. That is a deeply jarring image.
Right. The man who would eventually become Il Duce.
Yeah.
The dictator. The face of Italian fascism.
That is just, well, it's a contradiction that really sets the stage for what we're talking about today, doesn't it? Because we usually think of dictators as soldiers or revolutionaries right from the jump. We definitely don't picture them grading spelling tests.
And that is exactly why we are here today. We are doing a deep dive into the life of Benito Mussolini. And I want to acknowledge right up front the weight of this topic.
Yeah, we are talking about a figure completely synonymous with the rise of fascism and the devastation of Europe.
Exactly. We have a really detailed biographical transcript here as our source material. It lays out the timeline, his personal life, the military actions, his rise to power, and his very violent fall. But our mission today isn't to just recite dates to you.
Right, because anyone can just go read an encyclopedia for dates. Our mission is to look past those history book headlines. We really want to unpack the psychology here.
How does a blacksmith's son, a guy who started out as a socialist journalist, how does he transform into a dictator who wanted to rebuild Italy into this strong European power?
And we have to ask ourselves, what happens when a kid with a penknife grows up to control an entire army?
That's the chilling part. We are analyzing the specific turning points that led to his rise. And we're going to look closely at the philosophy that drove him. The source gives us this incredibly famous quote of his. It says, "It is better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep."
Which is a quote that sounds really inspiring if you read it on a gym poster.
Yeah.
But when you look at the reality of his life, when you see what living like a lion actually entailed for all the people around him, it takes on a much darker, much more tragic meaning.
It really does. So let's get into it. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, because I think we often skip the childhoods of these major historical figures, but the source material places a lot of emphasis on exactly where he came from.
It does. It places us right in Predapio in the Kingdom of Italy.
The date is July 29, 1883.
Right. So a summer baby born in the Romagna region. And we really have to talk about the family dynamic right off the bat, because the source paints a picture of a household that was practically a political pressure cooker.
Yeah, we have his father, Alessandro Mussolini, and his mother, Rosa.
And their professions are just so perfectly symbolic of the era and the forces pulling at him.
His father was a blacksmith.
A blacksmith. Now let's pause on that for a second. Think about what that job actually means in the late 19th century. It's incredibly physical. It's dirty work. It involves fire and iron. You are literally hammering things into the shape you want them to be.
It's all about force.
Exactly. It's about using brute force to change the shape of the world, or at least the metal sitting right in front of you. But Alessandro wasn't just a guy making horseshoes. The source is very clear on this. He was a socialist.
And not just a mild, let's vote for better taxes kind of socialist. He was a radical.
Now, I want to be clear here as we dive into this. Yeah. We're just looking at the source material to understand his background. We aren't taking any political sides on the history of socialism or fascism. We're just reporting what the source tells us about his environment. Absolutely. And the environment in that part of Italy at that time meant that being a socialist blacksmith usually meant you were highly radicalized. You hated the monarchy, you likely hated the church, and you probably spent your evenings reading revolutionary texts while banging on an anvil all day.
So young Benito is growing up with this literal fire in the house, this deep anger at the system. But then you look at his mother, Rosa. She was a teacher.
Right, the complete opposite end of the spectrum in so many ways. Education, discipline, rules, following the curriculum.
So you have the hammer and you have the book, the revolutionary and the disciplinarian.
It's a dual upbringing that must have created a massive amount of cognitive dissonance in a young child's mind. And he was the eldest of 3 children, so he was the one soaking all of this up first. He's hearing burn him down from his dad and sit up straight and follow the rules from his mom.
And judging by what the source tells us, the discipline side definitely did not win out in his early years.
No, not at all. The source explicitly describes him as short-tempered and disobedient.
Which brings us right back to the knife.
The penknife. Yeah.
I really want to dwell on this for a second because I know we mentioned it in the hook, but the source states he was expelled twice for stabbing fellow students.
Twice.
Once is an incident, right? Maybe an accident, maybe a playground scuffle that goes too far, but twice is a pattern of behavior.
It absolutely is. And think about the underlying psychology of a child, because we are talking about a young kid here who brings a knife to school and uses it.
It's just terrifying.
It suggests that when he encountered any kind of conflict, his immediate instinct was not to talk it out. It wasn't to run away or get a teacher. It wasn't even to throw a punch, which is your standard schoolyard aggression. It was to draw a weapon.
To puncture.
To do serious bodily harm.
It shows an absolute need for dominance.
Dominance at any cost. It's this mindset of, I will physically destroy you to win this argument. It's an escalation that goes way, way beyond normal childhood rebellion. It is a massive red flag.
And yet, and this is the part that really gets me, despite being this violent, volatile student, the source specifically notes that he managed to get good scores.
He wasn't stupid. And honestly, that is the most dangerous part.
Right. He actually obtained a teaching certificate in 1901.
Which highlights the true paradox of Mussolini. He had the intellectual capacity to pass the exams. He could engage with the academic material. He could play the game of academia when he needed to get what he wanted.
And then in 1902, he actually worked as an elementary school teacher.
Can you imagine being a parent sending your kid to that school?
I can't even fathom it.
You send your kid off to learn their ABCs, and the guy at the chalkboard is someone who was expelled twice for stabbing people.
It's this dark, terrifying irony, but I think it tells us something really crucial about his ability to mask who he really was. He could put on the sensible suit. He could stand at the front of the room and play the role of the quiet authority figure.
Which is pretty much exactly what a dictator does, just on a national stage. He learned how to perform the concept of order while harboring absolute chaos inside.
So he teaches for a little bit, but clearly the quiet life of a rural school teacher wasn't going to hold him. The lion wanted to roar, or at least the blacksmith's son wanted to start hammering on something bigger.
Yeah, he packs up and moves to Switzerland. And he essentially trades the classroom shock for a chisel.
The source says he worked as a stonemason.
Back to the manual labor, just like his father.
And it's here that he gets heavily involved in promoting socialism.
This is his real activist phase. He's young, he's living in a foreign country, and he is just constantly stirring the pot. He's organizing, giving fiery speeches, agitating the workers.
He was stirring it so much that he got himself arrested.
On various occasions, the source says.
Which is a very polite way of saying he was a serial troublemaker.
He was a massive nuisance to the Swiss state.
And by 1904, the Swiss authorities had completely had enough of him. They arrested him and deported him back to Italy.
They basically said, get out of our country and go cause trouble at home.
Exactly. So he returns to Italy. The source notes he then dives into journalism.
And this is a massive turning point, because this is where his voice really starts to amplify. You have to remember, in the early 20th century, a newspaper editor wasn't just a guy fixing typos. The editor was the equivalent of a major influencer or a primetime cable news host today.
Right, and in 1912, he becomes the editor of Avanti.
Which is a huge deal.
The source identifies Avanti as Italy's Socialist Party newspaper.
Avanti literally translates to forward. It was the flagship publication for the socialist movement. So being the editor meant he was a major player. He was shaping the opinions of the entire working class. He wasn't just writing articles, he was directing the philosophical flow of the movement.
So at this exact moment in time, Mussolini is a staunch socialist. He is a man of the left. He is following directly in his father's footsteps, preaching revolution.
He's anti-establishment, he's anti-war.
But then the great pivot happens. The shapeshifter really emerges.
This is arguably one of the most famous and heavily debated political U-turns in modern history.
The source tells us that Mussolini eventually condemned the Italian Socialist Party, the PSI.
He turned on his own people. He completely burned the bridge while he was still standing on it.
And he founded the fascist movement.
Just like that. A total flip.
So we have to ask what caused this. And the source gives us the catalyst, the war.
World War I. That is the breaking point.
The source says he supported Italy's participation in the war through his writings.
And this was the ultimate wedge issue. The socialists as a whole were generally very against the war. They wanted neutrality. Their argument was essentially, why should an Italian worker go kill a German worker? They have way more in common with each other than they do with the generals sending them to die.
But Mussolini wanted the war.
He absolutely did. And he didn't just want war to gain some extra territory. He saw war as this massive cleansing force.
Cleansing? How so?
He believed that a global war would completely break the stalemate of European society. He thought that if you put millions of men in the muddy trenches, all the old structures, the monarchy, the soft politicians, the bureaucrats, all of it would just be violently swept away.
So he splits from the socialists, he leaves his powerful post at Avanti, and he starts his own paper.
Right in Milan. He starts The People of Italy.
The source says he resumed his journalistic activities editing this new paper.
And just look at the branding shift there. The People of Italy. It's populist, it's highly nationalist. The focus is no longer about the global workers of the world. It is strictly about the nation of Italy.
He is shifting the entire loyalty base from class identity to national identity.
Exactly. And that shift right there is the very core of fascism. The idea that the nation is everything. The individual doesn't matter. Your class doesn't matter. The state is the ultimate authority.
But writing angry articles wasn't going to be enough for him. He needed actual power. He needed physical force. He needed to take that childhood penknife mentality and scale it up to a national level.
He realized he needed his own army.
Which brings us to the section of the outline we're calling Building the Machine, because this is where the theory turns into literal street violence.
He knew he couldn't take power alone. He needed loyal foot soldiers who were willing to do the dirty work.
And the source tells us exactly who he went after. To increase fascist influence, he targeted a very specific demographic, unemployed war veterans.
Which is just a masterstroke of cynical political strategy.
Break that down for us. Why target the veterans specifically?
You have to look at the context of Italy right after World War I. The war is over. Italy was technically on the winning side, but they felt entirely cheated by the peace treaties. The country was suffering from what they called the mutilated victory.
So the whole country feels ripped off.
Yes, and you have hundreds of thousands of men returning home from the front. They have seen horrific, unimaginable violence. They're traumatized, and they come home to an economy that is in complete shambles. They are unemployed.
They feel totally abandoned.
They feel abandoned by the very state they just bled for. They are angry. And crucially, they are already trained to kill. They know how to march in formation. They know how to follow orders without questioning them.
And Mussolini looks at this massive pool of angry, trained killers and says, I have a job for you.
He weaponized their trauma and their disillusionment. He gave them a sharp new uniform. He gave them a sense of purpose. He basically told them, you are the true saviors of Italy. The weak politicians betrayed you, but I will honor you.
The source says he organized these veterans into right-wing groups and armed squads known as black shirts.
The black shirt. It's such an intentionally intimidating image.
It really is. It sounds like a gang.
They essentially were a state-sanctioned gang. They wore the black uniform so you would know exactly who they were when they walked down the street, so you would be afraid of them.
And the political vehicle for all this street muscle. The source says he formed the Fascist Party in 1919.
And what was their explicit stated goal?
To reconstruct Italy into a strong European power.
There's the hook. The promise of strength. He was promising to take a broken, humiliated, struggling country and turn it back into a powerhouse. He was selling extreme national pride to people who felt deeply humiliated.
And people bought it. Or at least enough people bought it to make him dangerous.
Or they were just terrified enough by the black shirts to look the other way.
Right. And this strategy starts yielding real political results. The source notes that in 1921, Mussolini won election to the Chamber of Deputies for the very first time.
So now he actually has a foot in the door of legitimate democratic politics. He's back to wearing a suit.
But as we know, he didn't just want a foot in the door. He wanted to kick the entire door off its hinges.
He had zero interest in democratic debate. He was interested in total conquest.
Which leads us to 1922, the infamous March on Rome.
This is the defining myth-making moment of his entire regime.
The source states that he led over 30,000 fascist black shirts demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Luigi Facta.
Just try to picture that scene. 30,000 armed angry men marching on their own nation's capital. It looks exactly like a military coup. It looks like an invading army, but it's your own citizens.
And what was his justification? The source says he announced his ability to restore order.
The irony of that statement is just blinding.
It really is.
He is the one creating the disorder. He has his armed gangs roaming the streets, creating absolute chaos and fear. And then he points at the chaos he created and says, look at this mess, only I am strong enough to stop it.
It's the classic arsonist playing the firefighter routine.
Exactly. It's a mafia protection racket played out on a national scale. Nice little country you have here. It would be a real shame if something happened to it.
Now, the source notes that the demand was for Prime Minister Facta to resign. And in October 1922, Mussolini formed a new government. So it worked.
It worked because the establishment completely folded. They were terrified of a civil war. They thought they could bring Mussolini inside the tent, make him prime minister, and somehow control him.
That seems like a massive miscalculation.
It was a fatal miscalculation. They invited the wolf into the house because they thought he would just catch the mice.
And the source points out a fascinating detail here. He became the youngest prime minister of Italy at age 39.
Right, he was young. He was energetic. He presented himself as the dynamic future of the country, unlike the old men who had been running things into the ground.
But being prime minister within a constitutional system wasn't the end game. He didn't want to answer to anyone.
No, a lion doesn't ask a parliament for permission to eat.
The source tells us that the shift to full dictatorship happened in 1925. He declared himself dictator and assumed the title Il Duce.
The leader.
It's such an absolute title. The leader.
It implies that his personal will is the law of the land. There are no checks and balances. There is only the leader.
So he has total control of Italy. He has his black shirts. He has his absolute title. But the whole living like a lion philosophy demands action. He needs to validate that quote. He needs to prove his strengths not just against his own citizens, but on the international stage.
Domestic power is never enough for a dictator. He wanted an empire.
Which brings us to the section we are calling imperial ambitions and ruthless tactics, because this is where the violence moves from the streets of Rome to foreign soil.
1935.
The invasion of Ethiopia. The source says he invaded to add it to his new empire.
This was a completely unprovoked war of aggression. Ethiopia was an independent African nation. They were actually a member of the League of Nations.
But Mussolini wanted territory.
He suffered from this massive geopolitical jealousy. He looked at Britain and France with their huge global empires, and he felt that Italy was being treated as a second-rate power. He wanted his piece of the map.
But the way he went about taking it, the source really highlights the asymmetry of power here. It explicitly mentions his use of modern tanks and airplanes against the Ethiopians.
The Ethiopian forces simply did not have that kind of industrialized military technology. They were fighting back with outdated rifles and basic equipment against a mechanized European army.
It was a horrific mismatch.
It was a slaughter. But Mussolini didn't just want a military victory. He wanted to completely crush them to send a message.
And this is where the source drops detail that is truly stomach-turning. It specifically mentions the use of mustard gas.
Chemical warfare.
In 1935.
Yes. It had already been banned. The international community knew how inhumane it was. It causes horrific, blistering blindness and agonizing death.
But he used it anyway.
He used it against soldiers and he used it against civilians.
Which brings up a huge question. If he already had modern tanks and airplanes against an army that didn't, why resort to banned chemical weapons?
Because he was impatient. He wanted a very fast, very loud victory to broadcast back home. He didn't care about the rules of war or basic human decency. He He just wanted to present a conquered nation as a trophy to the Italian public.
It perfectly illustrates that lion mentality in the worst possible way. A lion doesn't care if the prey suffers.
Exactly. The lion just consumes. And Mussolini was more than willing to drop poison gas on innocent people just to feed his own ego and political narrative.
The source notes the Ethiopians surrendered in 1936.
And that was the peak of his domestic popularity. He stood on his balcony in Rome and proclaimed that Italy finally had an empire again.
He must have felt completely invincible.
I'm sure he did. The international community had put some weak sanctions on him, but he ignored them. He probably felt like he was literally reshaping world history by sheer force of will.
And that arrogance just keeps rolling. The source moves us to 1939 with the Spanish Civil War.
Right. He sent Italian troops and arms to support the nationalists.
He's just injecting himself into conflicts everywhere.
He saw fascism as the inevitable future of all of Europe, and he wanted to be seen as the godfather of that entire movement.
But then we hit 1940, and this is the fatal calculation.
World War II.
The source cites his declaration of war on France and Britain.
Now, the timing here is critical to understand his mindset. He didn't actually jump in right at the start in 1939.
Why the delay?
Because the reality was his generals were telling him that the military was simply not ready for a massive global conflict. They lacked raw materials, steel, oil, and modern equipment.
So why jump in a year later in 1940?
Because France was falling rapidly to the Germans. Mussolini looked at the map and genuinely thought the war was basically over. He thought Hitler had already won the whole thing.
So he wanted to jump on the winning bandwagon right at the finish line.
Exactly. He wanted to secure a seat at the peace negotiations so he could claim the spoils of war without having to do the heavy lifting.
But the source tells us that this declaration exposed his weaknesses in military equipment and army.
This is the moment the entire grand facade cracks wide open.
The moment the lion is revealed to be a paper tiger.
Precisely. Because dropping gas on a less technologically advanced nation is one thing, but fighting the British Empire, going up against fully industrialized modern armies, that is a completely different reality.
And Italy was not prepared for that reality.
Not at all. His troops were incredibly brave, but they were completely let down by the state. Their equipment was outdated. Mussolini had spent 20 years organizing parades and dressing people in black shirts, but he had entirely failed to build the actual industrial base required to fight a modern war.
So he built the aesthetic of a terrifying military, but not the actual functionality of one.
It was all theater. And when they finally entered a real war, the props just crumbled.
Before we get to the inevitable collapse of that theater, I want to take a slight detour. We need to talk about the man behind the title of Il Duce.
The chaotic personal life.
Because the source gives us a timeline of his romantic relationships and marriages that is just, it's incredibly messy.
It reads like a soap opera, but with the stakes of a European dictatorship.
Let's try to trace the timeline the source gives us. It starts in 1910. He romances a woman named Rachel Guidi.
Right.
And they father a daughter, Etta, that exact same year.
Okay, so they start a family.
But then the source jumps to 1914, and it says he marries a woman named Ida Dalser.
Wait, so what happened to Rachel?
The source doesn't say they broke up, it just says he marries Ida. And he has a son with Ida named Benito Albino Mussolini in 1914.
Okay, so he has a daughter with Rachel, then legally marries Ida, and has a son with her.
But it gets more complicated. December 17, 1915, he marries Rachel Guidi.
He marries the first woman. What about Ida? Did they get a divorce?
The source does not mention a divorce at all. It just lays out this overlapping timeline. He has a kid with woman A, marries woman B, has a kid with woman B, then marries woman A.
It's absolute chaos. And it reveals so much about how he viewed the people around him. It seems like he just treated people as completely disposable.
And the source notes that he and Rachel went on to have 4 more children together.
So she becomes the official public wife.
Right. And you just have to look at the overlap, the complete disregard for any kind of conventional order in his private life, while he is simultaneously demanding absolute strict order from the entire nation of Italy.
It's pure unchecked narcissism. He believed the rules simply did not apply to him. He could take whatever he wanted, whoever he wanted, whenever he wanted.
But as we were saying earlier, that narcissism eventually runs headfirst into reality. You can manipulate your personal relationships, but you cannot manipulate an invading Allied army.
Logistics and bullets do not care about your ego.
Which brings us to the final section of the outline, the fall of Il Duce.
The end of the road.
The year is 1943, and the tide definitively turns against him.
The source notes the invasion by Allied troops into Sicily and the Mediterranean Sea.
The war is no longer some distant thing in Africa or France. The war has arrived on Italian soil.
And the Italian public is fully aware that the dream is dead. Their cities are being bombed, the economy is ruined, the whole idea of the strong European power is a smoking crater.
The source says the explicit hope of the invasion was to oust Mussolini from power.
And it worked. But the blow didn't actually come directly from the Allies. It came from inside his own house. His own fascist Grand Council finally turned on him.
They voted him outright.
They did. They had him arrested. The king, who had been quiet for 20 years, finally had him taken away.
So he completely loses power in 1943.
But incredibly, it wasn't actually the end of his story.
No, and this is where it gets incredibly strange and pathetic. The source tells us that in September 1943, he was declared the head of the Italian Social Republic in northern Italy.
The puppet state.
Exactly. The source is very blunt about this. It says this new government was controlled by Germany.
So Hitler basically rescues him and props him up as a figurehead in the north.
Just think about the bitter irony of that. The man who started a political movement with the explicit goal of making Italy an independent, dominant global power, a man who called himself the leader, ends up as the leader of a fake state entirely controlled by a foreign power.
He was completely emasculated politically. He was a ghost ruling over a shrinking patch of land, relying entirely on German soldiers to keep him alive while his own citizens fought a civil war against him.
The lion was essentially put on a leash.
A leash held firmly by Berlin. He knew he had zero real power left.
But the leash couldn't protect him forever. The Allies are pushing relentlessly north. The Italian partisans are closing in on him.
Which brings us to 1945.
The source gives us the final date, April 28, 1945.
He was trying to flee, right?
He was captured in Giuliano de Mezzegra.
He didn't go down fighting like a lion. He was caught trying to sneak away.
And the source details his end very clearly. He died by execution, firing squad.
Put up against a wall and shot by his own countrymen.
He was 61 years old.
It is a stark, violent end to a life defined by violence.
Think about the massive trajectory we just covered in this deep dive.
It's staggering.
He goes from the elementary school classroom
Where he's stabbing kids with a penknife to assert his dominance.
to the editor's desk of a major newspaper,
Where he completely betrays his socialist roots to cheerlead for the carnage of World War I.
to the balcony of the Palazzo Venezia as a dictator.
Where he brags about using mustard gas on Ethiopians and sends a whole generation of Italians to die with terrible equipment.
And finally to a wall in a small town facing a firing squad.
Where he dies a puppet.
It is a tragedy, but it is entirely a tragedy of his own making.
And unfortunately, a tragedy for the millions of people who were dragged down into the destruction with him.
I want to end today's deep dive by circling back to that quote from the beginning, the one the source highlights.
It is better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep.
Now that we have fully unpacked his life, the reality behind the propaganda, what does that quote actually leave you with? Because at first glance, it does sound bold and defiant.
It is incredibly seductive rhetoric. It really appeals to that part of human nature that wants to be bold, that wants to reject the boring, safe path. But you have to look at the actual historical evidence of the man who said it.
Mussolini definitely lived as a lion by his own definition.
Right. He was aggressive. He was dominant. He took exactly what he wanted, and he lived incredibly loudly.
But just look at the catastrophic cost of that one day as a lion.
He left his entire country in absolute ruins.
He exposed his military as weak and unprepared.
He left his people fractured, starving, and occupied by foreign armies.
And he ended his own life completely powerless. He didn't die a glorious lion fighting on the open plains. He died a captive trying to sneak out the back door of his own ruined country.
So you really have to ask yourself, was the day as a lion actually worth the destruction it caused?
I think history gives us a pretty resounding no on that one.
It almost seems like the sheep, the average people who just wanted to live their lives, build their communities, love their families, and grow old in peace, were the ones who actually had it right all along.
Living 100 years as a sheep, if it means living in peace and stability and not destroying the world around you, is infinitely better than one single day of destructive, violent vanity.
That is a really powerful thought to take away from this. It's the ultimate warning about the dangerous romanticization of violence. Beware the lions who promise you glory but only bring ruin.
Exactly. Real lasting strength isn't about stabbing people to get your way or dropping gas bombs. It's about building something that actually survives you.
Well said.
And hey, maybe just double check the background of your kid's elementary school teacher.
Yeah, seriously. If they have a double expulsion for stabbing, maybe consider a different school district.
Just a little practical advice to end on. This has been a truly fascinating deep dive. Thank you for walking us through the intense psychology of this history.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
It is a heavy topic, but you have to understand these patterns in the past to recognize them today.
Absolutely. And a huge thank you to you listening at home for taking this deep dive with us. We will catch you on the next one.
Hey, take care.